Hello everyone and welcome to this session where we'll talk about the transformation. Unfortunately, the sound is not good enough to interpret.
Bonjour, vous ne vous êtes pas trompé de session. Nous parlons de l'agro-industrie.
Hello, this is the right session. We're talking about the agribusiness. Is food security achievable? Welcome everyone. My name is Akiko Suwa-Eisenman. I'm an economist and a member of the Circle, and I will introduce this session to you before I give the floor to my guests. And this will be moderated by Gaël Plétour. Food occupies an important place in our lives. French gastronomy has been added to the World Cultural Heritage by UNESCO, and that's a way of life, it's a social practice, or even a philosophy. Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are, wrote Bria Savarin in The Physiology of Taste, whose entire title is Meditation on Transcendental Gastronomy. Right now, today, I invite you to meditate on food security. According to the UN expert group on global food security, the HLPE, that I am honored to preside, food security is more than simply getting rid of hunger, because the aim is to have a diet with no hazardous substance, giving good nutrition to all, even in times of crises and conflicts, while respecting social and environmental conditions necessary to preserve tomorrow's diets. Human health, animal health, and ecosystem health, those three are all linked. At the center of that approach called One Health, we can find our diet with less chemicals, a diet emitting less greenhouse gas emission that's better for our planet and for our health. We know that agricultural yields are impacted by the lack of water, by global warming, by degradation of soils. Our food production is responsible for a third of greenhouse gas emissions, including methane by ruminants. Antibiotics used in agriculture weaken our ability to get better in the future because of antimicrobial resistance. Our diet is unbalanced because it is too concentrated in cereals and very poor in micronutrients that our body does not know how to produce, like omega-3 in fish products or vitamin A and C in fish in food like fruits, or vitamins in legumes. How can we respond to that public health issue? Scientific advice that are in the plan for nutrition and health are simple. We have to diversify food categories. We have to add to cereals legumes, oils, milk products, eggs, fish, while restricting sugar and added salts. Consumers can also be assisted by a simple, clear label, the Nutri-Score, which is also assisted by science. Yes, the consumer is the one deciding in the end, but we choose among the options given by the food system, and we are guided by advertising and by what we find in supermarkets. Today, during this session, we will look beyond agriculture and highlight the key role played by the agribusiness that processes products of fishery products and agriculture products in food for humans and animals. That sector in France is mostly micro-enterprises, but 22 companies out of the 20,000 in the sector have 40% of the turnover. So here's a question for our panelists. What can the agribusiness do to improve food security in terms of public health and planet health, and by when? Thank you. Thank you, Akiko, for opening this debate and asking this question. Welcome everyone, my name is Gaël Plétour. I have the pleasure to moderate this roundtable and to broach this topic, which is rich and complex. We have a great set of panelists. Guillaume Lequinf, you are the president for Nestlé. Paul-Yves Lantin, you're general director for Avril. Thierry Blandinière, you're director general for In Vivo. And Kakonu Bukpo, former minister for the evaluation of public policy in Togo. Guillaume Lequin, let's start with you. You are French and you're the European president for Nestlé, the global food leader. Recently, you've had to be faced with two alerts, one regarding your bottled waters and another one, like the entire sector, on infant milk. How do you explain these issues? How did you react to them? And what did you put in place at Nestlé? Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to talk about these two topics. Of course, we had to talk about them. When it comes to food security and public health, maybe we should make a distinction. So when it comes to waters, we are faced with a regulatory issue. It's not a health issue, it's not a food issue. However, the latest crisis in the sector, so that of infant milk at the start of the year, it's both a health issue and a food-related issue, and I'll explain why. Health issue because at the end of last year we had a quality issue on one of the substances in the milks that we identified as problematic. Up until then, that problem was not known, to the point that neither standards nor testing methodologies were in place. So we discovered that problem within one of our factories, and so we were whistleblowers in a sense. When you have an unknown problem that suddenly appears, you have to react quickly, but also react with reason. So firstly, you have to identify what's happening, understand why, and then stop production and recall what needs to be recalled. But when you start recalling, first you have to do it in a coordinated way with health authorities. And above all, you have to make a distinction between what needs to be recalled and what shouldn't be recalled, because that creates a food issue. One problem created a lot of worries in parents, but we also had a lot of parents calling us, asking us, where do I find milk for my child? So yes, you have to recall, but you have to replace very fast. So we have to deal with both, and once that crisis is over, then you have to learn lessons, you have to add some quality controls. We already had a lot on infant milk. For one milk bottle, we have 1,200 controls, and then you add to it, and you learn new lessons. So anything having to do with fermented products now is checked even more than before. And of course, we have to anticipate as much as possible. So since you've arrived at the helm of Nestlé Europe, as you were saying, health has become an important issue for you. Yes, as we say, if you want to earn the right to gain a market, you have to earn the right to play, and playing is in order to play, you need to have trust with the client. So if trust isn't there, if there's a doubt on quality, on security, on food safety, then you cannot talk of business. For us, there is no meeting that starts if we haven't talked first of quality and of food safety. Thank you for that first comment. Paul-Yves Lantoine, you are the Director General for Avril. Avril was born in the agricultural world. It's become a huge player in vegetable oils. And for you, keeping a control over health is keeping industrialization. And how do you do it? I'd like to recall a few numbers to start with, because what you said, Akiko, is very right. But I think, however, that within one generation, the quality of what we consume in France has progressed more than anything else. The cost of access to food in one generation has lowered by about 50%, when the cost of rent has increased by 50%, and the cost of entertainment has increased by 50%. And food issues, in terms of bacterial issues, have decreased a lot. So the likelihood of you falling sick because of a bacterial infection is very low now. When it happens, of course, everyone talks about it. Now, there's another question, how we feed ourselves, what our diet is, and that's more of a sociological question. We might be making a strategic mistake at the moment. food-wise in Western countries. We always want to improve, elevate the standards when our populations are getting poorer. Whether you agree or not, that's a fact. So we end up importing countries that are way less expensive than the products produced in Western countries with a health impact and carbon footprints that have nothing to do with the standards that we have in the EU. And I think we have an illusion when it comes to these food products. The French or the Western countries have never eaten as well. We've never eaten for so cheap, and we've never had a population that's as well fed in terms of nutrition.
Vous disiez, vous avez œuvré pour...
As you said, you've made effort to keep on French soil a plant that was faced with Chinese competition. Absolutely. We come from the agricultural sector and we're very proud of it, and we defend the agribusiness and agricultural sector in France because it is of high quality. About 2 years ago, upon request of the state, we've taken back a plant of amino acids, and we have our Chinese competitors producing for 3 times less. So we have to be faced with import products with certifications that are not completely lenient, but certifications that do not always reflect what's in the product. That competition, according to us, is unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the consumers. I think it would be a mistake not to say it. The cost of supporting this factory, I think I've never made the calculation, but it would come up to about ½ cent per slice of ham or something like that. So that extra effort that we have to exert altogether to preserve our food security is essential when we see all the borders collapsing. Thank you for your feedback, and we can now give the floor to Thierry Blandinière. You are the Director General of InVivo. You are one of the biggest European groups in agriculture, in international trade, in retail, and in the agribusiness sector. You've also had a lot of recalls in your career, as you were saying. In spite of that, you feel like we have good traceability and quite a solid chain in France when it comes to food safety. I'd like you to delve into the topic. Well, Paul-Yves has said everything. He's summarized it very well. For a few years now, we're experiencing agribashing, media agribashing, which is detrimental to the value of our agriculture chains. Are there no journalists in the room? I can express myself. I won't say anything. But it is a real important topic for us because we travel across the world. We work with value chains around the world, in Brazil, in Asia, in China, with French standards that are even above EU standards, which is also another topic when it comes to competitiveness. And that's something that's important to highlight when it comes to aligning on EU standards to keep being competitive. Anyways, I wanted to recall that it's been a very long time that we have a value chain dynamic in France. What's a value chain? It's about defining traceability. So when you eat a certain product, you're now able to go back along the chain all the way to the farmer that produced that product. And only France is able to do that, or maybe Switzerland, but it's smaller. But France is able to do that across the territory, and that necessitated a lot of investment. A lot of money was put on the table to implement food safety by major groups like the ones here. And the goal was to make sure traceability would be there, and that was the goal for generations. I would now like that effort to be taken into account by the audience. You have to realize that we're all determined to create a product that is safe, that you can consume without any worries. There can be incidents, as Paul-Yves has said it, it's marginal, but when there's an incident, of course, It's a shame, but it is a proof test of the chain. So when it comes to waters, for example, we were able to identify the issue very quickly, to go back to the distributor, to go back to the source, and to solve the issue within the day. And then we're able to find a solution. So it means we have a virtuous system in place, which is a global leader, which is a world champion, since we're talking about the World Cup these days. We are a world champion in terms of food safety. We have to remind everyone, I promise we have to remind everyone of that. When we take our consumers to plants, agribusiness plants, when they visit plants, it's a good thing. Same thing for employees. They should have their families come. And usually when people visit these plants, they come out of them fully subscribing to our narrative, because you actually have to go to the field to realize what's happening. We could demonstrate in the field, we can demonstrate that we have a properly secure system in place in France. And you said there was another thing that was important, identifying new risks. For example, cadmium, we've seen it, can of course, it's something that's on many consumers' minds at the moment, and you've also worked on that topic at In Vivo. Indeed, today there's always a new crisis, so we always have to get ready to understand the crisis and to process it. The cadmium crisis came out because someone from ANSES held a press conference and declared something that everyone knew in the profession, and I'm extrapolating a bit, but all of this is extremely standardized when we talk about fertilizers. Usually when we talk about cadmium, we talk about fertilizers, but it's not in that only. For example, so we can bring two answers. Firstly, do we respect the European standard? Yes. Are we going faster than the standard? Yes, we are, because we already have labels that are going above and beyond that standard. And should we go even further than that? Yes, because let's say the Moroccan supplier, if they have, if they're told the standard has lowered, they will actually adapt to a new standard. So there's no economic problem with this. So we've brought a lot of answers on cadmium, I think, to all media, and it seems we've answered right, because no one's talking about it anymore, it seems. Yes? They still are talking about it? Go ahead. I don't think the topic is completely over. Well, all jokes aside, I think it's important to show we're being cautious and we're being proactive. When a problem arises, we're able to solve it. We don't suffer from the situation, and of course problems will keep arising, but the idea is always to defend food safety, or food security rather. Thank you for your testimony. Let's move from Europe to Africa. With you, Kako Nubukpo, we're thrilled to have you on this panel. You're an economist at the CIRAD, you're former minister for the evaluation of public policies in Togo, as I was saying, and you're the former commissioner for the West African Economic Union. How would you describe issues in Africa where food security is unfortunately a quantity issue rather than even a quality issue? Well, indeed, we have both dimensions to take into account, quantity and quality. Right now, Africa can feed 2/3 of its population with its own production. There's about 1,300,000,000 inhabitants. So we bring 2/3 of their diet from African products. What's changed in the last 5 years is that shocks have multiplied, and they came from global crises. So the Russian-Ukraine crisis and the current crisis in the Persian Gulf. And those are three shocks that add to each other. So we have a first crisis, which is the crisis in terms of petroleum price, and then another shock on fertilizer price, and another shock on the price of cargo, maritime cargo. So it reduces our budget flexibility. For example, at the start of the war in Ukraine, the ton of a ton of a food product went from $240 to $100,000. No African state is able to adapt to that fast evolution of pricing. So that's an issue of food security for African states. For the 15 West African states, we've just come up with figures. We need at the moment $4 billion to fill the gap that was created by the crisis in the Persian Gulf. But aside from the question of quantity, and I subscribe to what was said by my colleagues, the question of quality is a question of public health in the end. And I'd like to give you another example. When I was the Commissioner for Agriculture in the West African Union, the topic that was the most preoccupying to me was that of fake veterinary products, and that's a topic that's related to so in West Africa we have a lot of fake veterinary products, but when you inoculate cattle with fake medicine, then you end up with that fake medicine in your plate when you're about to consume your food. The final consumer doesn't then realize that what's happening in the field early on in the production chain has an impact on their health. So the certification of veterinary products, traceability, all these issues are absolutely essential, even for very poor populations like African populations. So very often we have to find a trade-off between the access to quantity, to food in quantity, but also access to quality foods for poor populations, and it's not always an easy thing to find a balance for. So we've diagnosed the issue, but let's now talk of solutions, potential remedies for the consumer. What were you able to implement or observe that you thought was interesting? When it comes to solutions, the most obvious one is what I call agroecological intensification of production systems. We do observe that chemical fertilizers, with all the environmental crises at play, might not be the solution for Africa, or at least not the only solution for Africa. So something like, for example, associating vegetable proteins like legumes to cereals, that's very important. So when you have, let's say, 500 million hectares of arable land, which is the case in Africa, and 1 billion youth looking for employment, agroecology seems to be an interesting solution because it is very labor intensive. But it won't be sufficient. Which means that based on that productive structure, you have to develop true agribusiness chains. And that when the question of energy costs, transport costs is raised, as well as the question of the quality of governance, because those are very important to have structured value chains. Second type of solution that I would find interesting, it's what I call rational solidarity. As you know, Africa emits 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, but represents 18% of the global population. And we can tell there's a temptation to overutilize African natural resources to catch up with the rest of the world. But if we go that way, then the planet becomes uninhabitable. So the idea would be to cooperate to help not only African producers, but also agribusiness industrial players in Africa, and I think that would be very interesting. And the idea is not to implement charity, but to implement co-investment. And for some productions, for example, for cashew nuts, a lot of projects are being implemented, for example, with the Vietnamese, because we want to also promote South-South cooperation and what we call tripartite cooperation, so the Western world, the developing world, and Africa. Thank you for this clarification that gives us a lot of leads. We often talk of Dubai chocolates, crousty chicken and chips, Pauline Lanto, or rather Paul-Yves Lantoen. So what about this paradox where the choice by the consumer doesn't always fit with this desire to eat more healthy? It's a very good question. I think we have a sociological perception issue, truly. I recognize that we ourselves made mistakes. For example, at Avril, we bet on the important growth of vegetable proteins in human consumption, and it actually didn't take off. When you look at figures, it's been about 15 years now that the consumption of animal proteins has stabilized in France. It doesn't evolve, so it means we're still consuming as much meat. However, the consumption of meat is changing. We're eating more and more white meats and less red meats. And the paradox is that 50% of white meats we eat are imported in France. So the production decreased, because we were told or we were given quite drastic production standards, rightly so. So now we actually import a lot in France, and not just industrial players, but generally the entire agribusiness sector is importing a lot. And I'll be provocative, but I'll say that we probably import carbon. French agriculture represents 20% of the production of or emission of greenhouse gas emissions in France, and compared to the world, it's only 0.5% of emissions in the world. Not because we're better, but because we produce in a temperate climate, which produces less greenhouse gas emissions compared to, for example, rice production. And the more we import products from, for example, Asia, from the Ukraine, and I'm not going into the political debate of knowing whether we should have done it or not. I'm just saying that when we import, for example, poultry coming from the Ukraine, it is absolutely not produced up to the standards that we are used to. Once that's established, I think we should be pragmatic. I will repeat it. We have to delve into sociology. For us, our biggest trade product of the year is a spicy mayonnaise. So it's probably categorized as E, but that's what the consumer wants. Nutritionally, it's terrible. Should we refuse? Should we prevent the consumer from buying what they want? Probably not. Consumers have to make choices. However, the citizen, when the citizen buys and consumes, the citizen has to be rational on the judgment it gives to the entire value chain. We're left to meditate about it, and I think Akiko will take that into account in her conclusion. So, in terms of Nutri-Score, so a nutritional score that was promoted by a lot of brands like you did at Nestlé, is increasingly being abandoned, unfortunately, by other brands, and we see it less and less on shelves in supermarkets. But Guillaume Lecoinf, you still believe in it, both for consumers but also for your own internal improvements. Yes, before we talk about the Nutri-Score, I'd like to share a few figures with you to showcase what's happening within consumers and what the equation is. So, a few shifts struck me when I assumed my current position. 9 European consumers out of 10 have increased their level of expectation and made a link between food and health. Now there is no more debate. Everyone wants to eat a healthy diet. 1 European out of 10 actually manages to satisfy that expectation. So there's a massive disconnect between expectations and actually what's happening. 10 years ago, we would eat 3 times a day. Nowadays, we eat 5 times a day. So we need to be practical, and there's a need for immediacy as well in consumption patterns. And then particularly the French people, they have no intention to compromise on taste and pleasure. A few things that consumers know less but still are very important. 70% of European consumers have a deficit in fibers, and almost no one is aware of it. A nutritionist was recently telling me that half of teenagers have a calcium deficiency, a quarter of them an iron deficiency. So now the equation is the following. We have to produce tasty foods, nutritious foods, practical foods, and cheap foods. Well, it's quite simple, isn't it? Is it simple? No, absolutely not. But it has to be a profound transformation of our consumption patterns. It's an entire revolution for the consumer. So what should we do? We have to reformulate everything that can be. We have to rewrite recipes. We've worked on 1,000 new recipes at Nestlé without compromising on taste. Less salt, less fats, artificial chemicals are not being used anymore. Of course, we have to keep producing mayonnaise. But that's one of the many options that consumers have. I think we should be offering options, alternatives, and then we have to innovate. Innovate. We have to have products with products that are with added fibers, added proteins. We know how to do that. And once we've done all this, then that's when the Nutri-Score comes into play, because we have to simplify a topic that's quite complex, and we have to be able to give the consumers tools. Sometimes the consumers are quite lost when we talk of this topic. So the Nutri-Score, we fully believe in it. Since 2019, we've gone along with the labeling, and we have no intention on getting rid of it because it is a very interesting perspective. So when we launch new products, we make sure they are either A or B in terms of Nutri-Score. And internally, when I attend meetings on innovation, you can see teams that are really challenging themselves when it comes to the Nutri-Score. Usually the first question is, that product is categorized as C, what can we do to bring it to B? So it's also a strength in terms of innovation, of recipe improvement, that's a tool that's being used internally, and I'm really happy about it.
Thank you very much, Thierry Blandinière. You'd rather bet on protected label of origin for the consumers. Why? So these labels have been here for a long time, for 30 years, and we wanted to bring more traceability on the origin of product. Consumers want to know where the product come from. So it is the result of a long history of a lot of work, building added value chain. But obviously we wanted to keep the competitive side, but we wanted product to be distinctive according to the origins, and this is what was promoted to the consumers. Obviously the prices must not be too diverse, they're 3 or 4 cents. But 20 years ago, chickens were provided with QR codes, so you can track the chicken back to the breeder. So this is not comparable to everything you can do today, but there was a philosophy of commitment on traceability, on connecting back to the territories. And French agri-food supply chain have been based on this traceability for a long time, but there are other elements to be considered. There are many boxes to check. We mentioned the Nutri-Score. There can be the Planet-Score. So how can this value chain become carbon-free? How can we show that our strategy is part of the solution to fight climate change? So those are the challenges of the future. We need to add new standards, to check more boxes, to try to combine all these parameters without sidelining the price, which must remain competitive. So there's also a psychological price with margins to be built, and we must add as many standards, as many qualities as possible, as many properties as possible in the way we produce. And in the end, we'll have a denser contract with farmers. They will have more secure income through these contracts. And the same goes for Africa. We must ensure an income in the next 5 years with product produced in specific conditions. Farmers must be remunerated adequately. We'll need time to reach that target, but we must work on all along the supply chain. On a global scale, we mentioned various value chains. Well, we are there we could go work in Africa and we'll do the same thing. We'll have a discussion with local farmers. We will bring them an added value supply chain. They will get a greater remuneration. They will have prices guaranteed. They will have agreements with local brands, and that could become decarbonated in the future. So the whole world is going in the same direction. But I do think that France has a lot to give and to export, most notably her know-how. And about that, how can we transform the agribusiness value chain to answer all the questions raised by Akiko? Pauline Blanto, and over to you. I want to be optimistic. We can do great things. And I think that everybody knows here that 30, 40 years ago, France heavily depended on American soya to feed animals. Avril produces French proteins, works with colza, and we've been working with labels to improve the quality standards of animal food. And nowadays, French proteins are of better quality than imported protein. But it is important because when we talk about safety, it's about quality, but it's also about protecting our country. Flow chains are being challenged at the moment. Once upon a time, it was really hard to imagine there would be another conflict in Europe. We thought it would be impossible to have a pandemic impact our economy 5 years ago. And that's what safety and security is about. How can we feed our co-citizens with local products and with quality supply chains, but even more? There was a meeting with American and French leaders in Versailles, and France is proud of it. So that's one achievement, but there's also food, our local food, which is quality food and affordable food in France. Talking about food, we'll talk about fertilizer. Thierry Blandiner, you work on global trade. How can we make fertilizer more ecological and more immune to volatile prices because of geopolitics? Concerning food sovereignty, we are heavily dependent on imported fertilizers, and realized with the war in Ukraine and with the rise of fertilizer that costed up to 800 euros per ton, there was a rise of price of cereals too, which means that it was quite difficult for farmers to maintain their income. And today the situation is different. The price of cereals remains stable, but there are economic issues for cereal-based income. But that's another question. Let's talk about sovereignty. How can we relocalize fertilizer production in Europe, and under which format? And how can we control the quality of fertilizers, the so-called decarbonated fertilizer, if possible? So if we do not want to make the same mistakes again, which means that we want to set ourselves apart by focusing on decarbonated fertilizers with electricity, hydrogen, and so on. We do not want to use any gas, no oil. So that's our ambition. But this is a long-term ambition, and we have to think in the long term, because there are no quick fixes. This is a strategic challenge. It is about investment. And it is an achievable target. There's also a challenge in terms of price and about compensating, filling the gap between winter fertilizers and summer fertilizers. There are 200 and 300 euro gap usually, but that's our target. And along with real and other entities, we want to recreate a fertilizer production plant in the north of France, 30G. We've been working on this project for 3 months along with other partners. Our ambition is to invest in a plant that would produce 500,000 tons of fertilizer, and we could also process 3 or 4 million tons of cereals in the northern basin, so that this region could become, by 2030 or 40, the first cereal basin that is 100% decarbonated. And we mentioned 3 or 4 million of tons, which is a sufficient quantity to make a quotation on Euronext as a commodity. So decarbonated fertilizer will become a commodity, and that will send a strong signal to the market. Runex would like to be one of the first entities to deal with a green commodity. So as you can see, 5 years, 10 years from now is round the corner, and we can reach our target if we get together. There are also economic issues, but when there's a will, there's a way. And we have a potential way to check all the boxes, to relocalize our production and regain sovereignty, and we can also ensure that agriculture remains sustainable within a decarbonated economy by 2040. But in order to reach the target, we must start. Let's start together today. And we'll be really happy to go back and check in 1 year. Guillaume Lequinf, you want to reach for regenerative agriculture, which is necessary to be upstream. So there is an evident connection between health, soil health, nutrition, and taste. Then moreover, the land is a good carbon pool, so land can offer us many options. But how can we ensure and guarantee a transition? We could tell farmers to start the transition, but that's not feasible. And I'm going to tell you why. Is there any business case, any economic gain for any farmer who wants to make the transition? There is, I think, but there's a cost and the risk. So we must support the agricultural world in this transition. We need to provide funding or co-funding. We also need to spread risk, because there are risks at stake in the next year. So we need to provide financial and technical solutions while committing alongside farmers in the long term, because the transition will be a long one. So we must ensure 5-year or 10-year contract. Otherwise, it will be really difficult for them to make a transition. But there are many topics at stake, and it is the responsibility of the processing industries and final customers to mobilize around farmers in this transition. As for final customers, Thierry, you wanted to comment on this? I think we agree 100%, and I knew it because I knew Nestle's strategy on regenerative agriculture. Among the 3 companies represented here, we can scale up. If we have a 5-year contract in our various specific sectors, we can make it. We just need to sit down and do it all together. Yes, we must do it together to ensure a crop rotation. So we need several players to fight alongside farmers. So you have a target by 2030. Yes, but this is new. In France, 40% of ingredient processed in France come from regenerative agriculture. It will rise to 50%. It is 60% in Germany. But if we bring in the final consumer, we explain that we need to ensure the good health for human beings and land, then you will realize we're all in this together alongside farmers. So you are about to reach an agreement. Kakonubuko, you advocate for agroecology, you already mentioned it, but you want to take up the challenge of globalization. And you said it was quite difficult, right? Yes, there are two dimensions that are crucial, in my opinion. There is the question of public health and the connection between food and health. Currently, most African public services develop free school meal program so that children can get at least a healthy meal a day, because they don't always get one healthy meal a day since there's extreme poverty. Moreover, diseases emerge from industrialization, and Africa is the only continent that sees its rural and urban population rise. It is the only continent in the world which has this double demographic rise. So there are emerging diseases such as diabetes, which become major diseases, even for developed countries, or rather developing countries. And I was contacted by the French Academy of Medicine a few months ago so that we could, together with the African Academy, we could actually tackle the problem of diabetes in African cities. Then there's another aspect which I would call equitable multilateralism, which brings me back to our discussion. And Africa is the adjustment variable of all agricultures in the world, and this cannot go on because it can undermine the stability of the planet. Another example, when an American rice producer works for 1 hour, and when a Senegal rice producer works for 1 hour, the American producer will produce 400 times more rice than the Senegalese. But its production cost is lower because there is a rising production scale. So on the small market, on the same market, the Senegalese farmer would simply disappear. So there's a discussion we must have with our friends of the North for an equitable globalization. We need to talk about us going up the value ladder, because gaining values must not be detrimental to 1,000 countries. So we should take a look at the question of food security, at the question of fighting poverty and hunger. And I am referring to the first SDGs. The first one is fighting poverty. The second one is zero hunger. And the SDG 3 is promoting health. So if we want to keep on living in harmony in a globalized world, we must ensure that the North surplus doesn't come in the South all of a sudden. We need more rationality, a new rationale that can help the billion young African people to access the job market. I feel that Thierry wants to respond, to answer. I would like to talk about the supply chains as the organization of agriculture in Africa. Here's farmers must organize to get the job of the first revolution to capture a part of added value. You mentioned cocoa, but I do think that a major agribusiness group should get together to externalize the first transformation so that they can become a shareholder of the transformation, so you can steer it, so you can commit on the economic level. Then you will produce valid value, and there will be the first margin and the first transformation. So we need public policy that are virtuous. And without them, it would be very difficult to make progress in African states. We are ready to bring our contribution to this organization, because this kind of organization went through the first transformation. So we could provide support to fund the first tools of transformation, and you'll be the one to organize it. Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes left for questions from the audience, and then we'll conclude. There are mics in the room. Good afternoon. As for cadmium, France is the most impacted European country. So it's, you mentioned 20, it's not 20, it's 80. And I wanted to warn you against incinerators too. Libération published 3 pages on the topic. Le Monde made another article, and Libération too. And I talked to many people here. Nobody knows, well, what is an incinerator. Incinerator burns waste and wood, producing toxins, ultra-thin particles, and filters can't arrest them. And this is funded by public funds. There are many that are already built, many underway, and many more are planned. And these projects are being funded by the government, and they will be spread all around the territory. What is your question? We do not have much time left. So you talk about the ecological challenge. So what about this? Okay, so this is maybe out of your expertise field. You just talked about incineration.
Est-ce que vous souhaitiez répondre, Monsieur Blandinière?
Do you want to answer, Mr. Blandinière, or should we get to the next question? No, I can answer this. We are trying to be aware, to get information about what you mentioned, and we keep on trying to find solution. Each issue as a solution. We do it on our scale, and we're producers, so we have a say. But we're not politicians, we're industrial players, but we do have a responsibility towards consumers and citizens. We're trying to listen all the feedback and to influence public policy if necessary. So I do not know much about this topic, but if this is an issue, we should actually act and change and mobilize. That's all I can say, but I don't really know much about this topic.
Merci. Alors on va prendre. Il y avait plusieurs mains qui se.
There were many hands raised, but I apologize. We should take one more question only. Thank you very much. Just a few words to tone down your optimism. You said there were controls being in place in France, that food is safe. And I'm afraid I don't agree. I'm part of an association. I'm a physician, and we discuss health topics, and there are products in non-organic agriculture that have combined effects that can add up to each other. So there are products leaving traces. There are dangerous products leaving traces in our products, and these effects add up to each other. So you can't say that our food is safe. That was my first point. And secondly, if I understood well, you are a player in the agri-food industry. And now I would like to talk about processed food, which is a disaster. You are flooding supermarket with this processed products. This is terrible, and I know you're only doing your job and you're good at it. But I know people who do not want to buy this product produced in plant. They're too salty, they're too fat, they can lead to heart diseases. So please stop making processed food. Don't go buy them. Go to your local shops. And by the way, I'm sure you don't eat this kind of product. Who wants to answer? So we do not have much time. We do not have time anymore. There is an association for the œuf mayonnaise, which is a French dish. It is a part of our culture, and we must promote it. This is now the time for Akiko's words of conclusion. Thank you very much. As you can see, agri-food was a topic worth discussing today, and I have two comments. Waste management is part of food safety. It is part of the food sustainability. So you mentioned incinerator. If we burn waste, food waste, it is an issue of safety. If we use huge packages that we have to throw away, this is a topic that is relevant for food safety. So you're right to raise these questions. As for processed food, there is a definition. My researcher colleagues work on this definition to see what this kind of transformation implies. There is this cocktail effect for food, for medicine. Researchers are working on it. And to end with a statistics, with a carrots puree has much more beta-carotene than carrots. So food processing can have a positive effect in nutritional terms. And Mr. Blandiner can sign his book right next at the FNAC stand. Come and see me, we can have a discussion, sir. Thank you all.